fix it?
I don't know. All these wires.
Well, you must try.
Well, I'm doing my
The
best.
doctor's relying on us.
Well, put your finger on there a minute, will you?
Here? No!
Good. That must be the live terminal.
Hello, and welcome to the commentary track for this unique DVD presentation of the Doctor Who story, The Invasion. My name is Mark Ayres, and it's my job to restore the soundtracks for our Doctor Who DVDs. But if you're still wondering why I describe this particular release as unique, joining me around the laptop in this rather live and well air-conditioned room at the BBC's White City Media Centre are Steve Marr from Cosgrove Hall, who is an animator, and James Goss from BBC Online. So, James, why?
Why the animation?
Yes.
Simply because it was a very exciting idea that a friend of mine came up with, and it seemed nice to see if we could possibly do it.
And how did Steve come on board?
We'd worked with Cosgrove Hall on projects like Scream the Shulker and something called Ghosts of Albion, and it was just great fun sending Steve an email going, "Hello, we haven't got any money to do this, but would you mind animating a Cyberman story without any Cybermen in it?"
Which I jumped at, obviously, and the idea of doing black and white flash animation just seemed so odd that it was an obvious thing to do, really.
You said you'd always wanted to do a black and white animation.
I had always wanted to do a black and white. I didn't think anybody else would ever want to do a black and white animation, and so it was a great
But we
gift.
sent you an email saying, "Wouldn't you like to do it in widescreen and in colour?" And you went, "No,
No, of course not.
Now, I was going to ask that. Did you seriously consider widescreen colour, or was it always no, please flash black and white?
I think very briefly we did, but we realised that if you were going to have to go in and out of animation, which was already one challenge to overcome in the whole project, to have to then go in and out of widescreen and colour back into black and white 4:3, it just seemed crazy not to just stick with
I love this bit.
the original format. You like him banging on the console.
Yeah. This was the first stuff we got through from you.
Yeah, after the test piece that we did, because I managed to do some Cybermen for the test piece, didn't I? That helped you
That's
kind
now
of
on the
sell it
trail.
into the project. Yeah.
Now, this intrigues me. This alien spaceship, where did this come from?
It just kind of picked up on something that's spoken about later on in episode 4 when they talk about seeing something on the dark side of the moon, and it's kind of partially to do with that, really.
It actually quite nicely covers a continuity problem with the
Yes.
story, in fact, because in this first episode they just see something on the dark side of the moon and a missile is launched. I think later on in the story they thought, hang on, what would have launched it? Oh, let's mention a spaceship. And Zoe suddenly says, oh, the spaceship we saw on the dark side of the moon, which isn't mentioned at all in part 1. So sort of sneaking that in is quite clever.
Thank you. And there was also there was quite a gap in the sound where there wasn't anything specific going on and nothing we could kind of identify in the script that we should have been putting in there. So
It'll be interesting to see what some of our purist fans make of that.
But
of course.
it's also really helpful in that it actually makes it a lot clearer what's going on. Because otherwise you just have this idea that the TARDIS turns up and immediately the Cybermen fire on it because... for why?
I think this is one of these kind of projects where you can quite legitimately tread a fine line between being totally faithful and just pushing the envelope a little bit to do something a little bit different with it. You have to be careful, I think, not to go too far away from the line.
I think from a tonal point of view, the directorial tonal point of view, nobody wanted to bring in Matrix-style time slice and jump cuts and all these kind of things. We wanted to try as far as possible to keep within the style of the existing live-action episodes, which are great, and the last thing we want to do is to make the animation jar with that. But in the same way, we were able to open out the sets and the space a little bit, especially later on in this episode when they're out and about, which would not necessarily have been as easy with live-action budgets at the time. But yes, it was a fine line between making sure it matched the existing live action and bringing something unique about animation to it.
And when you initially did the animation, you put a Sputnik-type sound effect on that. For the final release, I've replaced it with the authentic Radiophonic Workshop cyber spaceship sound, which is used later in the story.
Yeah, the occasional piece of extra spot sound effect that I dropped in, I was hoping that would be replaced later on. It was really just to give an audio cue to the animators for something to work with.
There was only a couple, actually. There was that, and there was later in part 4 when you've actually pulled a cut forward where Zoe and Isabel are up in the high building looking out at the Doctor, and you've pulled the cut to the exterior forward by, I think, a couple of lines, and you put a little bit of extra wind noise on.
Yeah, that's right. Again, that was something that was really thrown up by the fact that we were working with animation. We were able to cut outside that whole sequence with the helicopter. We were able to expand on, because obviously we don't have the difficulty of having a helicopter flying around and shooting it with cameras in the 1960s.
Indeed, and again, I have to say, in audio post, I've actually tidied the helicopter sounds up a bit so that the whole thing works really tightly now. I think it's a terrific sequence. Commented earlier, there are actually no Cybermen in these 2 episodes that you animated. Was it disappointing to be asked to animate a Cyberman story and 2 episodes without Cybermen in, apart from the very end of part 4, of course?
Well, I think James lured me into this project on a false promise of actually animating Cybermen, which never came to pass. But I did do the Cybermen on the steps of St Paul's
For the trailers.
for the trailers.
Well, as test footage so that we could tell the story. Just lovely footage of Cybermen standing there in the rain. And we went, that's really nice. And Steve went, I'm not going to get to do any real Cybermen, am I?
Is something wrong? Look, we better get clear of the lorry. Come on.
Oh, this is so beautiful, this scene.
I love this.
This is very noir, isn't it?
I love noir films, and this was a great opportunity. They're sneaking about, they're frightened, and this character's a great character. And to a certain extent, he was unusual. The driver, that is, he was unusual from a lot of the other characters that we were creating for the show, because we had a lot of visual reference for all the other people in the show. For Vaughan and for Packer and Doctor and everybody. We didn't have really any visual reference for the driver except one photograph that's flashed on screen by the Brigadier, and so I kind of took that as a jumping-off point for the look of the driver, and we ended up with this guy here. But he's a really good character. He's a really kind of strong and heroic, and I think he's a bit hacked off about dragging this old man around with him and these 2 people, but he's a kind of terse hero, and I really like him.
Well, no, we've been a little out of touch. We must have been. They're the world's biggest electronic manufacturers. You can hardly buy a piece of equipment that isn't theirs. Quick, get up.
Oh, it's so dark. This is just brilliant.
This compound.
They set up a whole community of their own. Factories, houses, a vast network.
It's Edge of Darkness stuff, this, isn't it?
I know, you never hear about the colony again.
No.
It's all really scary, but it's such a brilliant setup. Because I've never even heard the episode before it started coming in from you. I'm just going, this is brilliant.
It is an odd setup, actually, isn't it, story-wise? Because, as you say, Steve, it doesn't actually go anywhere. They set up this colony, and this guy's trying to get away, presumably to report back to UNIT and tell them what's going on. He never makes it, and there's a brief mention later on. The Brigadier says we've had a man in there, and he hasn't been seen since, but...
I have to say, just as an aside, we actually got a real Thompson submachine gun into the studio and took a load of reference for these sequences with the guards, because it's used a lot later in Section 4, so yes, I had access to a decommissioned machine gun which we used for this.
Oh, it's the little touches.
Did you do much rotoscoping or live action shooting? I mean, there are sequences here which are obviously rotoscoped from other reference scenes in other episodes, but did you do any original filming to give yourself other character movements?
A little bit. There's Cosy Hall's exec producer, John Doyle, who was kind of my technical advisor on this as much as anything else, because he's such an expert on Doctor Who, was quite happy to scamper around pretending to be Patrick Troughton when we needed it, so that was kind of very useful.
I love the sunshades because it makes them look as though they're slightly robotic. It's a really nice subtle... You're just still cross, there weren't any Cybermen in this.
I am, yeah. It was kind of good. I mean, one of the other things I did was I watched around the Doctor Who series, so I watched films that came out around the same time for reference of the vehicles and the look and some of the shots and things that they were doing in the movies, especially British movies from that period, black and white British movies, and that proved to be really useful.
I love animated Patrick Troughton. He's just such a wonderful
He was a gift. He was a gift to any animator because he's just got such an easily caricaturable face. Characters like Jamie and the girls were much more difficult because there was nothing to grab onto as far as character, and you can't cover their faces with lines and stuff like you can with Patrick Troughton, but he was just...
I love that little shrug that he does then. I'm going to die because I've just explained the plot.
And here again, you've shortened this scene slightly because there is a whole sequence where these guards go around looking in the van, which I'm sure would be incredibly tedious to animate and not make much sense.
No, and from a director's point of view, when I was boarding this bit with Mike Waite, it seemed to lose impetus with that. It was kind of it just seemed better just to keep rolling with this. It's such a dark part of the story, quite shocking, I think, for a Doctor Who episode, for a character like this to be shot, and it's not. It doesn't feel like it's by a kind of an alien force. It's kind of really brutal interaction between two lots of human beings, which seems quite unusual for a tea time sort of show from that time.
It is very gritty, isn't it, and very dark. Certainly this first episode. I think it lightens up later on, but all this stuff is...
Well, certainly when Isabel arrives, taking photographs of herself, it all kind of...
And this car, I think, was, if I'm right in saying, was actually on location, driven by Douglas Camfield, the director.
Well, that car that is actually in the show is my car. So. It was. Unfortunately, it's gone to be a stock car now, but it was, at the time, it was my British Racing Dream Mini Cooper.
H2363.
That wasn't its number plate. That's a little Doctor Who reference there. According to John Doyle, it's something to do with the date of the broadcast of the first Doctor Who. He insisted on me using it.
Well, that's odd. It says Watkins. Must have the wrong house. Well, the telephone directory definitely said number 18. We'll ask.
What's amazing about this is how well the idea of having photographic backgrounds and then real people works.
It's such a photographic style. I mean, it was a step away from the work we'd done on Scream of Shalka, because then I'd kind of stylised everything, but for this, obviously, because it had to hook up with the live action, the characters are much more realistic, though obviously simplified, and the backgrounds we had to source from the existing footage, because we wanted people to know when they went back to the same place in the live action that it was the same place, so we had to make it, immediately recognisable. And it was really useful and time effective as well. So, we didn't have a great long schedule to make this.
So how did you generate the backgrounds?
I actually spent a lot of time looking for clean frames in the existing episodes, and as far as the TARDIS went, TARDIS interior, then looking at other Doctor Who episodes around the invasion to get the reference. But clean frames very useful, and then we did a lot of painting out of elements and characters and figures and stuff, and then treating it and repainting into it. But there's a lot of photographic stuff in there, and a lot of it was grabbed from the existing episodes, which is great. I mean, it was the way it should be. It just made it so much more easy to hook up with the live action.
It's an astonishing technique. It works so well.
Now, James, tell us about Zoe's costume.
It's all my fault. It's completely wrong. We didn't notice. Because the first stuff we saw was the TARDIS stuff, and when it came in, we were just so busy going, "It's Doctor Who, look at Patrick Troughton talking, it's Zoe's." And at no point did we ever actually think, "Oh, is it the right costume?" But for people who are really upset, Zoe just came back from the land of fiction dressed as Alice in Wonderland.
Strictly, she should be in the silver cat suit that she's wearing.
You've got no evidence to prove that. There are no photographs.
Strictly,
that's really what she's wearing.
I wouldn't have objected to put her in a silver catsuit, I have to say, but I think she looks lovely the way she is.
She does. We'll point out in a moment where she should have changed into this costume, and in episode 6 of this story, she changes back into the silver catsuit again.
Now, who is there?
But we just all hold our hands up and say nobody noticed it till too late. Sorry.
But you get Isabel as well.
Well, they both look lovely in their frocks.
One of the things we ought to point out, of course, is that there is very, very little photographic reference material from this story.
But 27 pictures of Isabel sat in a cornfield in a hat.
Very nice too.
Very useful it was.
And absolutely no telesnaps. Telesnaps being the off-air pictures which were taken by John Currier as a reference.
On Isabel's wall, is that a picture of Bart Simpson?
No, there's no picture of Bart Simpson. It does say Bad Wolf on that wall, actually.
No.
Yeah. There are a few strange numbers on there.
This is the scene during which Zoe would originally changed out of the sparkly catsuit into the costume she has been wearing in order to model for Isabel. And in fact, there was a recording break at either end of this scene while they put the flat in and out with all the writing on the wall. Of course, Steve, you're also famous for Cosgrove Hall for Danger Mouse. Is there much crossover between Danger Mouse and Doctor Who?
The basic techniques, I guess, really of any type of drawn animation are the same, but one of the things that the Patrick Troughton character and Danger Mouse share is that they're non-flippable characters, because the Doctor has his handkerchief in one pocket and Danger Mouse has his eye patch over one eye, and if you flip it, people know that you've reversed the animation, so you can't get away with it. So that was it's a little bit of a pain.
I love this.
This is all sort of nicked, isn't it, from episode 2, a lot of these setups
yes,
here.
It is indeed.
Which I can understand must save a lot of time.
Well, it was just, I mean, it's also authenticity as well. I mean, we wanted to make it as authentic as possible and relate as closely as possible to us, but yes, it did save a lot of time as well. So, and it's a nice pose for both of them. And slightly mad, especially Zoe's pose. Now, I believe they shot this. This is it's a BBC building, isn't it? Where they shot this.
Millbank Tower.
Is it?
Is that a BBC building? I'm not sure that it is.
Or is that where the Millbank's where Labour is based? Was based until recently, isn't it? So, right. I knew I recognised the building.
This is I like this.
This is a great machine. This was a really good machine, but this scene goes on for such a long time. Trying to find a new way of shooting the machine, the inanimate spool-to-spool machine that he's talking to was quite a challenge.
How many different Patrick Troughtons did you have?
Quite a few, actually. I think in the end we had about 8 Patrick Troughtons. It's slightly, in slightly different positions and stuff. And obviously, dozens and dozens and dozens of different body positions. But as far as faces went, we had about 8 to choose from by the end.
How do you go about
face kits.
building a character like that then for animation?
The way we do it is that each of the head positions, so that's his profile head, is an individual kit that we can take and place on different bodies and in different scenarios where we need a profile Doctor. And within that head there are dozens of different mouth positions and different eye positions, and then those can be individually animated and then lip synced as well. So it's all sort of contained within each individual head. It's quite a complicated system if you're not used to working with it, but once you're used to it, it saves an enormous amount of time when it comes to lip syncing and that kind of stuff.
And this is all part of the Flash kit, is it, that you're using?
It's something we've built using Flash. It's not. It's kind of a proprietary thing that we developed at Cosgrove Hall, but it works very well.
And how do you deal with lip sync issues? How do you block those?
Because we have the soundtrack. There's a little bit of rotoscoping there. We have the soundtrack inside the head, and we can basically choose each individual mouth position phonetically to run alongside the soundtrack, and it's really done by ear and by eye by the animators as they go.
So you no longer...
Great camera move, this. It's one of those slightly cheeky, that's...
You don't do it the old way of having to go through the soundtrack and mark it.
We don't use dope sheets. No, this is much more instinctive, and I think works. It's less of a separation for the animator, and certainly from a speed and cost point of view, we couldn't do that anyway. No.
All the way through the Invasion, Tobias Bourne only ever uses one button on his desk.
He does,
and it does everything.
And he doesn't blink. That's saved on animation.
It's probably the only practical button they built.
This is me actually falling to the ground. That was a bit of rotoscope for me.
And how do you do the smoke overlays there?
It's just a semi-transparent, blurred piece of animated smoke, really. It's simple as that. It's actually solid white, but then we make it semi-transparent over the top and blur it.
So do you work
cycle
in layers in Flash? So you...
Yes, and it kind of works.
This bit's so graphic.
It is. He's quite a...
You can't
quite a
punch Patrick Troughton.
No.
Bring them to my office.
I bordered it roughly, and then we animate it roughly, and at the end it comes back to me, and I put all the lighting on and things like the layers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So you can pull any of these characters out and move them around individually of the others, or on the file base.
Yeah, some of these scenes have literally hundreds of layers.
I think Vaughan's office looks terrific. You've taken a lot of reference from later episodes and built an office for him. And does that again live in a single file, or is that lots of different files?
It's lots of different shots depending on the angle that you need. And then each of these elements is separated out, so the blinds are on a level and the background's on a level, because he has 2 identical offices, one in central London, doesn't he, and one in at the base out in the countryside, and the central London office, so you can actually see Big Ben in silhouette outside, just so you know it's London. And but we could keep the rest of the office by just removing that backcloth and dropping a new one. And probably not unlike
the way they did it.
The way they did it. A lot of the shortcuts and the
two enormous photographic backgrounds.
Yeah, very similar techniques in many ways.
Oh, Tobias Vaughan's great in this.
Yes, did you enjoy animating him? I mean, he's a brilliant character and superbly played by Kevin Sterling.
I mean, James will vouch that some of the characters' first design versions I sent, you said, yeah, great, and Bourne was one of them, whereas Jamie, we spent ages batting it backwards.
Girly lips.
Yeah, it's having because his face is so, clean and young, and there's nothing characterful to grab onto. It makes it much more difficult to caricature him than it does with somebody like the Doctor or with Tobias Vaughan, where it's just a gift. A couple of drawings and you've got him.
Oh, the satanic eyebrows.
No, I'll have them sent to my workshops immediately.
Oh, how very kind.
Not at all.
Do you have a favourite character of the ones you've worked on for this? You think it's the driver earlier on? I think you've probably given us that impression. Or...
No, I think it's the Doctor, to be honest with you. Just that he was great to work with. I really enjoyed doing the Doctor.
It was amazing because you sent through a little Patrick Troughton iMovie Blinky test.
Yeah.
And it was so hard not to email it to everyone I knew.
Yes, it was just Pat's face, wasn't it, doing all the different movements.
And Claire and Andy and Mike, they did a lot of the character animation. I think they really enjoyed working with the Patrick Troughton characters, although I think Claire enjoyed working with Isabel and Zoe, which are actually more difficult because their expressions are less extreme. So, to get subtle acting in the two female characters, actually more difficult than it is in these guys. We had no reference for this kind of MacGuffin, this piece of kit that
they're talked about, but you never really see them.
I think
Peter Halliday, you've done good work on, because a few years ago he was playing the romantic lead in A for Andromeda, and he was a young, sexy scientist, and he ended up, by the time back he was playing Comedy Garden episode 3.
And he was the Silurians voice in Doctor Who and the Silurians as well. So he was monster voices in that. And then he was Pletrak in Carnival of Monsters, so he became sort of part of the Doctor Who rep.
But in this one he's a hard-nosed thug.
He really is as well.
Who keeps on getting it wrong, poor chap. I mean, he's
a
very
bit of a
critical.
Bernard Bresslaw type character, isn't he?
Far less frequently than that.
Yeah, he's got a forked tail and wee horns.
Oh, I'm not joking, Jamie. Underneath all that charm, there was something...
Steely look.
There's an amazing moment coming up with Vaughan looking out over London.
Now I love this animation. Again, it's a rotoscope sequence, isn't it?
No, I think it's the cliffhanger, isn't it? So yeah, it's the end of the episode. Yep, we use some rotoscope there.
And the guys in the car just there, I didn't comment on it as it went by, but that was originally set on the rooftop opposite. You put them in the car to match part 2. Again, a good reference. And in adapting the soundtrack, I have to say I have removed the camera shutter noise because we don't see the camera, and also the footsteps on the roof. We have to call a halt there. Steve, Mar, thank you very much. James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will leave you in the capable hands for the next 7 episodes of Fraser Hines, Wendy Padbury, Nicholas Courtney, and Christopher Lee John. I think this is a great piece of work which everyone involved should be very proud of, and it's a great way of making Missing Who live again, I think. So, thanks, chaps.
Thank you.